For the most part, I did enjoy this Final Fantasy. It was good. It was way better than I thought it was going to be. And I was kind of surprised because when we started playing it, a lot of people came into my chat saying, not a lot of people enjoy this Final Fantasy, but I myself did. That's what people in my chat would say when they came to visit on Twitch. A lot of people said that they felt like this Final Fantasy was the underdog and that it didn't really receive a lot of hype. Now, if you think about the kind of titans or, you know, the kind of cliche Final Fantasies that seem to do well, Final Fantasy VII, obviously, Final Fantasy VIII is fairly popular, Final Fantasy X could be argued as maybe one of the most popular. I'm not saying it's everybody's favourite, but there obviously are games that done really well back in the day. And Final Fantasy XII sometimes flies under the radar. Just sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. So my point is that I'm getting to is that when we came into this, I didn't think it was going to be that great. But I was actually pleasantly surprised. So the things I enjoyed the most about this game, because there's a lot to talk about here, and I'll try and cut it down and keep it as smoothly paced as I can. First of all, the environments that the game gives you are really, really exciting to explore. You have a lot of freedom of choice when exploring, and they just look great. It feels fantastic. It feels like you're actually on a journey in a lot of points throughout this game, and sometimes they can be a little bit too big and a little bit too sprawling. Sometimes there's not enough save crystals dotted along your path and you can be in the same area for a long, long time. If you couple that sometimes with particularly frustrating enemies, it can get a little bit painful, but for the most part, like 90% of the time, especially in the early to mid game of this Final Fantasy, I really enjoyed exploring the areas. I thought it was fantastic. The pacing at the beginning of the game is very good, and coupled with the fact that you've got a wide variety of environments and biomes in the game, it's just a really nice fit together of a video game. Sometimes you get Final Fantasies that drag. They have areas that you're in and it's painful. This Final Fantasy XII does have elements of that, but not until way later in the game, in my opinion, and I'll get to that in a bit. But for the most part, the early game, the setting of Rabanast, or Rabanastra, the fact that you're introduced to Vaan, Penelo, some of the other characters like Balthier and Fran very early, I really thought that the game in the early stages kept flowing quite quickly. You had a really nice blend of cutscenes and action and story. So the cutscenes were very, very clean in this, especially for, again, PS2 era. This game looks phenomenal, especially on the HD remaster. So, yeah, really enjoyed that, and felt like, especially all the way through the game, from start, middle, and end, all of the cutscenes were great throughout. On the HD remaster of Zodiac Age, I sometimes felt like the audio was a little bit strange, but again, I'll get to that in a little bit. Let me just give you guys the good stuff first. All of the action-packed kind of cutscenes towards the end were great, and then again, in the early stages, the cutscenes were fairly lengthy at times. It almost kind of felt like you were watching like a short movie or an anime in between all of your scenes. I didn't personally feel like the story was that smooth, but if you're playing this game a couple of times over, or you're just paying really good attention, I'm pretty sure it could do just fine for you. I kind of got lost sometimes in some of the places and the politics in the beginning, but because there's obviously all the narration that goes on, and it took me a while to come to grips with where's where and who's who and which part of the realm is fighting the other part. But the kind of, again, the initial setting of Rabanastra with Vaan as your kind of introductory character, all of that is fairly smooth, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to keep up with like who the good guys and the bad guys are. So I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that you started off in Rabanast. Obviously Vaan is coming up as a kind of the kind of orphan figure, where he's the street rat, kind of like Aladdin. Actually, he's got a bit of an Aladdin vibe going on, and Penelo as well. Obviously, they're like the two underdogs in the city ruled by like the evil empire. So I thought that was a really good start to the story, and from there it just kept on going. You know, one minute you're in a desert, the next minute you're going through the, like, I don't know, like a forest. Then you've got your kind of badlands. Then you've got like your icy mountain area. You've got your fawn coast area and the beach. There's tons and tons of environments in this game. You've got the mines, the treetop areas. It's just so many biomes that neatly fit together in this game. Now, for me personally, I've played a decent number of Final Fantasies at this point, and sometimes the games are super, super linear, and then sometimes they are, you know, maybe not Final Fantasy, but some RPGs can be too open world, which is quite a bold statement to make, but bear with me. Sometimes you can be left wandering, and if a game is too open, too wild, it can take a lot of time and patience to get through, and if you get lost or the quest logs or the HUD is not good enough at showing you where to go, then those kind of RPGs can be troublesome, and I think a lot of players can lose interest. Final Fantasy XII was like a perfect balance of those two concepts. You had so much flexibility in how you could travel around the map. And when traveling around the map as well, you often had points in the story where you could just go and do other things if you wanted to. So if you didn't want to go to the next area and continue the story, you could go back. You could travel all the way back through the map if you were so inclined and do other stuff like hunts, or maybe just grind your party up in an area. Maybe you wanted to go and, I don't know, look for new weapons or new summons that are dotted about the game. There was so much kind of side content in this game, and the side content, in my opinion, was done right. It was an RPG where you have these optional things to do, and they're not thrown in your face at all. The game doesn't shove it in your mouth and be like, you know, you have to go and fight this sub-boss, you have to go and do these hunts. They were just there if you wanted to, and I feel like that is like absolutely perfect. If you can get good rewards and decent money, and you know, the kind of hunts and the enemies in the hunts are unique and interesting, that is like such good, it's just good supplementary gameplay to your core storyline. And I had a lot of fun doing those. We didn't do all the hunts, mind you, but we did do some of the regular hunts in the beginning. We did a lot of the elite ones for the clan, and then also we did some extra hidden optional bosses and Esper fights. Again, not all of them, but we did a fair handful, and I felt like that was enough for me personally. But it's cool that there is obviously late game content as well if you're so inclined to do after the story. So yeah, I think the things that stuck out in my mind, first and foremost about this Final Fantasy, and what I will remember from this game, taken like moving on, is just how beautiful the game was to explore. And I really love that inside of these kind of RPGs, when you feel like your characters, they start out with nothing. You know, you start at level 1, you get shit weapons, shit armor, you got no money, no items, and then you just go out into the world, and it is like a beautiful world. It's not a, you know, there were doom and gloomy elements to this particular game, but for the most part, the game was an absolute pleasure to explore most of the time. Again, there was some areas, I feel like the Western Sands was a huge area that I liked personally, but I feel like a lot of players might get a bit bogged down around about that area. I know there's a lot of players that might not hate the game, but they might just lose interest and think, oh, I'm in this area, I can't really be bothered going back to that, I'm just going to leave it. And then that would be a shame, because I feel like Final Fantasy XII has a lot to offer in that regard. One other thing I want to talk about is obviously the differences between the combat in this game to some of the other Final Fantasies. You obviously have your automated system that kind of threads together with the gambit system. Now, some people might not use the gambit system at all and just play the game like regular, whatever, in complete manual control, but I really enjoyed the gambit system, and I think that the game truly benefits from utilizing that, educating yourself on how it works in the beginning, which again isn't that tough to figure out, and then unlocking it through the kind of upgradable board that you have. And yeah, the gambit system was really exciting for me. It was really fun. I enjoyed using Bash, Vaan, and Ashe. All these names sound similar, so forgive me, but the cast was fine for me. I enjoyed most characters, and I tried my best to swap all the characters around as much as possible and trial them out. I loved that in the Zodiac Age I had full flexibility with the checkerboard and the upgrade system for your characters. In the beginning, I didn't love it, but as soon as you unlock your second board, there is a lot of flexibility there. Especially in the early game, I got to a point where I really wanted to grind because there was so many things I wanted. You know, HP upgrades, new spells, new weapons, new armor. Like, the whole lot of that was pretty good with the board. I enjoyed it. This kind of leads me on to my next point, which is that I do wish, and this is a kind of a light criticism about the game, I do wish that your backup characters in this game would earn XP when you're not using them. Sometimes in RPGs, you know, if you've got your main cast of Vaan, Bash, we used Vaan, Bash, and Ashe. Fran and Balthier, even though I loved Balthier and Fran was pretty cool as well, they fell behind very quickly in levels, which was a bit of a pain, and I don't know why the game couldn't have maybe given them like 30%, 40%, maybe like a pool of XP, maybe not the full amount to keep them strong, but maybe like some sort of backup XP to keep them somewhat relevant. There were items that we did utilise for people like Penelo. Penelo was kind of hobbling along as my substitute character. She was my time mage, and therefore she was very useful to me. I did put the double XP item on her quite often to try and keep her relevant, but the other two characters in Balthier and Fran fell behind very quickly for me, and that kind of made me sad because I wanted to keep using them. I just, again, a little bit of XP to those guys would have been pretty cool, I think, for the most part, but the economy in the game was really well balanced, and what I mean by that is that when I was out grinding and fighting monsters out in the wild, either doing side quest hunts, grinding for the sake of money or whatever, I felt like when I was earning cash and selling weapons, all the money came together in a really satisfying way where I was always just able to buy a couple of new things, but not too much. If I had been able to go into every shop and buy everything from the shopkeeper, I feel like the game might have been a bit lackluster. I had to choose, you know, do I want to buy some new Gambit abilities? Do I want to buy new spells? Do I want to buy armor for Bash? Do I want to buy a weapon for Pinello? I had to choose really carefully when buying, and when I went out to grind, because I couldn't buy everything at once, suddenly all the grinding that I was doing was made more enjoyable because I had a reason to be there. The soundtrack for Final Fantasy XII was really nice as well. Not my favourite Final Fantasy, but it was good. It was pleasant. It was really good soundtracks. I felt like some of the voice acting for some of the characters was fantastic at times. Not the audio quality itself, because that's a completely different topic. Some of the deliveries of some of the characters, I felt like Cid, you know, Balthier's father that you fight towards the top of the Pharos Tower. That whole scene, the music coupled with his delivery of his lines, if you're interested in this kind of talk, I thought that was fantastic. I honestly thought that he did such a bang-up job. There was an area you go to in the game as well, I forgot the name of it, but there's like a monastery that the party goes to at one point on top of like a kind of town. It's in the flying sky, I believe. There's a city flying in the sky, excuse me. And you go into a temple and there was a boss you fought in there, and the delivery of his lines as well was phenomenal. So shout outs to all that shit. If you're interested in that, I felt like the performance of the characters was good. Obviously, and I don't know if this is just Zodiac Age or the HD remaster, but I did feel like the audio was a bit tinny in this Final Fantasy when the characters were speaking to one another at times. It feels like, I don't know if they were compressing the audio, I don't know if the microphones they used were shit, I honestly don't know what was going on, but the audio for the actual characters speaking to one another felt a bit weird. And then there was also a bit of imbalance that we kind of noticed towards the end as well. Sometimes the cutscenes were really loud and clear, and then sometimes they were really quiet, and I had to constantly adjust up and down to get that. Now, you guys might not notice that. It's not going to be a problem for a lot of people, but it's worth mentioning for sure. I do feel, and one of the other things that kind of I felt like this Final Fantasy was a bit poor with was the whole Pharos Tower segment at the end of the game. That was the only part that I didn't enjoy in this entire playthrough. The Pharos Tower was a bit stale and a bit slow. I heard a rumour from the chat, again, I don't know if this is confirmed or a fact, but people in the chat told me that when the main director was travelling through this game in the development cycle, apparently he actually left just before the characters get to Vegan for personal reasons. I don't know if that's true or not, but I did hear that he actually dipped just before that part of the game was created. Again, I don't know if that's true or not, but it would explain why the Pharos Tower was a bit kind of meh. Another thing I'll quickly point out in terms of this game that maybe tilted me a little bit is that there's a couple of status procs in this game. There's a couple of status effects that can happen to your characters that are a bit annoying. Yeah, there's like a virus disease debuff that just for some reason just gets put on your characters, and then they just get all of their health put down to like 1 HP. I don't exactly know how it works, but it seems to like half your HP and then it halves it again or some shit. I don't know. I'm sure there's an explanation I could find online, but now that we've finished the game, I'm not really that bothered about it. Disease did have a cure. There's actually a remedy you can buy for it, but it's only once you've done a certain amount of hunts, and it's only sold to you via the clan seller that is available in Rabanastra, I believe. We did actually find those. I think that remedy was called a serum. So the disease was able to be cured, but then there was some boss fights in this game specifically where the enemies would also cast Disable on your character, which basically just stops your character from working. It's not death, it's not an insta-kill, but it's as good as. There was a disable ability that could be placed on your characters at some points of the story, some particular fights, and I just didn't understand why that was put in the game, because it was... I know it's supposed to be challenging, but it's almost just like an anti-fun, right? It's whatever. I feel like there was only a few times we encountered some of this bullshit, and because I didn't feel like there was a way for me as a player to counter that, it felt a bit painful. There are skill points in the skill tree to try and make your remedies better, and I think that some of those might actually cover Disable and things like that, so maybe even Asuna cleanses it. I don't know, there's probably ways around it. I'm not saying it's totally undefeatable, guys. I'm not saying it shut us down and stopped us for days on end, but it did feel a bit kind of BS, and if they had kind of nerfed that or removed it completely, I honestly wouldn't have been bothered, because again, there is a lot of stats debuffs in the game, and those ones were particularly uncool, shall we say, for want of a better word. But I will quickly say as well, as a last postscript on the end of this, that Zodiac Age had a speed up button in this game, a turbo mode, and I was very grateful for that. It was just so handy. The game is huge, as we've just talked about. The open world is huge, so being able to speed up if you want to do that as a player, having that option is very nice. So shout outs to the Final Fantasy devs for including that in the Zodiac Age and whatever else. But yeah, that's it, guys. Let me know your thoughts. I don't know if there's anything else I've missed, but there was so much to talk about in terms of this Zodiac Age game, or this Final Fantasy game. There's so much, and I've just kind of autopiloted. But if you guys have any thoughts on YouTube, and let me know in the comments any of the things you liked about the game, any things you didn't like, any things you would have liked to have seen improved. I think I covered most of the things that I enjoyed and wanted to talk about, but yeah, Zodiac Age, that's my final thoughts.